friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I'm here today to talk about why I choose to crush most of my dried herbs rather than storing them in their whole form or powdering them. And I said most because I don't crush everything. It's just going to depend on that particular herb or flower that I'm dehydrating. For example, I've got the Camellia japonica flowers here, and these I have not crushed, and I haven't really needed to, and I'll get to that in a minute. And before I show you how I do that, let me talk about my reasoning. So a lot of people like to store their various herbs in their whole leaf or flower form, and I understand why. They believe it's because it's going to preserve most of the nutrients by doing so. And then there's people that like to powder it, which is on the opposite end of storing them in their whole form. And me, I prefer to crush. And I believe that I preserve just as many nutrients as those who store them in the whole form. And I'm talking about the things that you're going to put into storage for at least a year or more. You know, if you're going to powder it up and use it right away, that's different. So I shoot for that middle ground. And not only because I believe I'm still preserving just as many nutrients, but because I am saving so much more space. So for example, let's take these sage leaves that I've crushed just a little bit to make sure they were dry, but pretty much are still in their whole form. And I'm going to put them in this mason jar. And so if I was to fill up this mason jar with leaves like that, you can see how much space in there that they take up. Now watch what happens when I choose to crush them and the difference it makes in the storage. So typically the first thing I like to do, which is one of the several reasons I like to crush them, is I can feel them better with my fingers and go through it. Like right here, since a lot of these were not, I only had a few that were fully dry. This one right here is not fully dry. Now on my original, when I just touching it, it felt like it was fully dry, but until I tried to crush it just now, you can see that's the best I could do. Where the rest of these with my fingers are crushing up just fine. Oh, nope, there's another one right there. Not fully dry, so that needs to go back on the dehydrator. And I do not want to put those into storage like that. And here's some more. So this is one of the reasons why I like to use my fingers to crush. That's going to be a lot better indicator than just taking a leaf, especially when you're talking something like sage leaves that can feel very dry on the outside when they're in the process of drying. But when you go to crush those thicker leaves, you're going to find a lot of them might not be as dry as you think they are. So I don't want that being vacuum sealed into a jar with that moisture in there and going back into storage. Okay, so the remaining crushed amount that I have in there is nice and dry, and I have the security of knowing that. Now let's look at how much space that takes up. You see that? Very, very little space in comparison to about here with the whole leaves. So that means I can get a whole lot more into a single jar than I could by putting them in whole. And then right here is another example. Not all of these are crushed yet. So these are rose petals. It's a mix of white and red because right now I'm getting a lot of white roses. Usually I like to stick with the red, but I'm not getting as many red roses this year because I hacked one of my plants way back. So when I was first filling this jar, I was just drying the petals and just putting them in there. And when the jar got up to here, when it got nearly full, I decided I didn't want to start another whole jar. I wanted to just top off this jar. So I took one of my tampers that Patrick made. So for a regular mouth, I use this one, this long-handled one, and it's narrower. And I simply started pressing those rose petals down like that to crush them. And when I got done, they took up a little less room than this because the few petals that were on the top, this one layer that I had before I just did that, was after I had smashed them down. So when I smashed them all down, even though the jar was clipped to here full, by the time I got them all smashed down, they were only up to about right here. So now you can see how much more room I have in that jar as a result. So that means I'm going to use at least 4 times the amount of space by storing them whole than I'm going to, especially with something like the sage, because and basil leaves, anything that's a bigger leaf. The rose petals, maybe not as much because they're smaller, those particular roses, but anything that's a big leaf, you're trying to store a whole, some things like, say, comfrey, you're only going to be able to stick a few leaves in a quart jar, especially if you're talking about the real big comfrey leaves, the ones that get this big. So as such, I'm using less jars, so less waste of my jars, less waste of my space. Thus, I have more space to store even more things. And then why is it that I believe that I am preserving just as much nutrients as those who store in a whole form? Two reasons. Such as, let's see, none of these are ready to vacuum seal right now. And this one I'm actually working through, and that's my calendula, but here's some comfrey that I'm not quite done filling up. But when I do this and pressing it down, even after I crush it with my fingers, I'll still use a tamper to press it down so that I can pack even more into the jar. Now, when I first held this up, it was up to here. But by using that tamper and pressing it down, I have room for a lot more comfrey. Then, when it is done, I will put the lid on, make sure the top, the rim, and the lid itself are clean, and then I will vacuum seal it. And there are many ways to vacuum seal. This is just one of them, this cheap little set here that I've been working with, so I can check the longevity, and even though I didn't need it because I have other ways, I typically use a brake bleeder pump with either my vacuum chamber or with the food saver tops, depending on the type of jar I'm sealing. But I'll link to a set like this below. There's several different out there. They're all pretty much the same, but the little pump makes it, with all that, makes it worth the cost. It's the cheapest way to get started into vacuum sealing. So anyway, I'm just going to pump all that air out, or pull the air out of the jar. Even though don't have it full, I still want to demonstrate. For those who haven't seen my other videos. And by the way, I will link to one of the chamber videos and a brake bleeder video so you can see the other, in the description box down below, so you can see the other ways you can vacuum seal. Now that I've removed all the air from the jar, and let's say I've got this filled up, there's very little oxygen, if any, left in the jar. I've removed all that air, and so now that's going to preserve the nutrients and the medicinal properties far longer than if I didn't vacuum seal. Now the herbs will still be good even if you don't do that, but by removing that oxygen, that's going to help it preserve its nutrient value longer. The other thing is keeping the jars, if you're storing in jars like this that are clear, in something dark, whether it be a dark pantry or you're putting them, a lot of this stuff I'll put down in boxes and then store back in my pantry room, which also has curtains over the windows to keep it as dark in there as possible. So, because light will also destroy your nutrients. And then this jar, I just filled it, and just to go over this real quick, if I had a lot more flowers to go in here, at the time I was filling this up, I would have went ahead and crushed it. I could now go ahead and take these, crush them, and I would guess that I could fit them into a pint-sized jar, even though I'm about 1.5 pints worth of the dried flowers here. Let's go ahead and crush it and see if I'm correct. So I'm going to crush these down. Look at this. Less than a pint jar, I'd say. Look at the difference in the space they take up. They just look prettier in the jar the other way. However, what I'm going to do, take the sage out of there, and I'll go ahead and dump these into this jar since it's already a regular mouth. And look at there. I just saved half the space, and I still have room in there for more, just by crushing it. And I didn't even crush them. I can still see some are kind of hole in there. But I saved a lot more space by doing that. So another great example right there on how you can save space, and I already have a jar for this to go in, by the way. I just haven't pulled it out. In my personal opinion, when it comes to saving space and also preserving your herbs for the sake of their medicinal benefits, their nutrients, and so on and so forth, I think crushing them is the best way to go. Again, if you prefer to add your herbs powdered to things, you can always powder them when you go to use it, or powder up a small amount at a time and keep it in your cabinet and keep it close by, and then that'd be something you'd work through quicker. Really what it comes down to is whatever you find is best for you. If you're saving the herbs, especially when you're talking medicinal herbs, for their benefits, you want to find the ways that you can best preserve their medicinal properties. And to me, this is one of the best ways right here. Dehydrating on a low heat, not a high heat. High heat will destroy it. And then crushing and vacuum sealing into your jars for long-term storage. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and share your thoughts and ideas down below. How do you like to preserve your herbs? Some people like to freeze them, especially when they're talking about culinary herbs. They might freeze them in ice cube trays with water and then throw them into soups. That's another way to do it. Though I have read somewhere that dehydrating at a low heat actually preserves more of the nutrients than freezing, which kind of surprised me. But I think I only saw that at one place, so I'm not sure how accurate it is, but that's definitely something you might want to look into. Anyway, please share your thoughts and ideas down below, and thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.